This program is brought to you by SoundsTrue.com. At SoundsTrue.com, you can find hundreds of downloadable audio learning programs, plus books, music, videos, and online courses and events. We also host the annual Wakeup Festival, a 5-day experience of transformation, held in August of each year in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. You can also join our free direct access membership program and read transcripts of all of the Insights at the Edge podcasts and search our collection of podcasts with now more than 100 episodes available. At SoundsTrue.com, we think of ourselves as a trusted partner on the spiritual journey, offering diverse, in-depth, and life-changing wisdom. SoundsTrue.com. Many voices, one journey. You're listening to Insights at the Edge. Today my guest is psychic and author Jack Rourke. Jack is a skilled and compassionate professional, offering his abilities as a psychic to individuals, businesses, and law enforcement. He specializes in the use of clairvoyance and has the ability to feel and hear extrasensory information. He is a gifted seer with an understanding of the human condition who possesses a genuine desire to serve. With Sounds True, Jack has written a new book called The Rational Psychic, a skeptic's guide to extraordinary perception, where he presents a detailed, thoughtful, and often surprising examination of seemingly supernatural and psychic events, relying on decades of first-hand experiences and scholarly investigation. In this episode of Insights at the Edge, Jack and I spoke about how science can better verify psychic abilities. We talked about how a rational psychic views something like spirit guides. And finally, we talked about what a heart-based motivation might be for cultivating psychic abilities. Here's my conversation with Jack Rourke. Jack, in your work, you make a distinction between what you call paranormal experiences and psychic phenomenon. And I think usually people group this whole thing into one big soup of all that woo-woo. But you're actually, as the rational psychic, helping us separate and really look at things using a rational lens. So let's begin by looking at these two categories and why you've chosen to categorize unusual experiences in this way, two different categories.
There's a couple of reasons I chose to break the perception up into two categories. The first reason is principally because psychic perception is the ability to perceive information else without using the five physical senses, information that is objectively verifiable. And so without an ability to objectively verify information, how do we know it's real? You know, it keeps us in check, keeps us honest. More importantly, it keeps us in touch with ourselves, you know, because what we could be perceiving could be projections, could be our own judgments, our own evaluations, our own emotional foibles and mental pains or what have you that we're perceiving as phenomena outside of us. So it kind of has a two-pronged thing. One is it's helpful for us, and it enables us to know ourselves better. And two is it keeps us stable. And three, actually keeps us honest. And then with paranormal perception, I coined that term because typically things like ghosts or energies, entities, anything that takes a belief system, you know, those things are normally conceptualizations of emotional experiences, the influence the environment has on our body. Worst case scenario, they can be ways to manipulate others, manipulate situations, and passively assert control over circumstances. And so I felt like it was important for someone to come forward and communicate more specifically exactly what these kinds of perceptions are.
Okay, so I want to take this a little deeper. But basically what you're saying is psychic phenomena can be verified by a third party.
It should be.
In order for it to qualify for what you're saying is true psychic experience.
Correct.
And so do you have examples in your own life of things that have been clearly verified and you say, here it is? I mean, it's fact.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of ways. One is that we've never met before, and if I was able to communicate something personal about your life, specific, that perhaps I was sitting with a client once, and she actually happened to be a psychic. I didn't know this, a practicing psychic. And, I began to give her sort of some details about her life and some circumstances and things like that. And then I actually stopped and was communicating something to do with her lower back. And the way my mind was perceiving this was that I began to describe to her, I said, help me understand this. Let me just tell you what I'm getting, because it doesn't make sense, but I'd have to spit it out as I'm getting it. I said, the way I'm seeing this is as a cat would jump across your back and use it as a springboard. I know that doesn't make sense, but then it rakes your back. I said, I'm getting do you have a cat? I said, I'm getting these kind of cuts and scratches on your lower back. And I said, hold on a second. I took my pad and I kind of drew this pattern, and her face went white, and she turned and lifted up her blouse, and she had had a series of surgeries on her lower back that left these random patch marks of scars. And so that's something I couldn't possibly know. Something more recent was at the end of the winter of 2011. I was filming a TV show in Haverstraw, New York, and I didn't know this at the time, but Haverstraw was famous because it's where most of the bricks were made in North America until shortly before or right after the First World War. And I had been doing a meditation the morning before I went to the set, and I asked, at the end of my meditation, to see any information that was relevant to that day's filming. And it was sort of a haunted house, type TV show, and I was meant to go there and talk about whatever was going bump in the night there. And so I began to see these bodies piled up under the ground. And I thought, oh my God, this is ridiculous. I mean, I can't go to a haunted house, set and say, or the house that's supposed to be haunted, and say on camera, there's bodies buried in the ground. Like, to me, that seemed like too hokey, too spooky, too...
The TV producers would love it.
Oh, sure. But I think this is not rational. This is ridiculous. Long story short, as it turned out, when they did some research, I did talk about it on camera. When they did some research, they came back and had an old New York Times article in 1906. The owner of that home used to be the mayor of that town, and he was directly related, or was doing business with the owner of the brick manufacturer, and he was getting kickbacks, and he let the guy dig closer and closer and closer to the residences, and eventually he caused a landslide, and a whole street collapsed and was consumed by the earth. And it was very cold. There were fires because the gas lines broke, and the clay, when it kind of rolled over the earth and swallowed these houses, it turned to cement. There was sand and water from the fire hoses, and 19 people were never recovered. So these bodies were buried in the ground, and I was able to perceive it, and it was verified by a 1906 New York Times article. So these are the kinds of things, and sometimes they're not that dramatic. That's a 1 in a million type situation, but most times it's more subtle. When we require information to be verified that way, I think that there's some aspect of our mind or some aspect that's greater than what we are, works with us, and conspires to communicate in a way that, conceivably is much more fantastic than just normal dialogue.
Now, I've talked to a lot of different people over the years who have had different psychic gifts, and many of them, I think, have had experiences similar to what you're describing in terms of working with a client or having a vision that was then verified by something in history. But they've also been wrong quite a lot. Sure. And many of their experiences haven't been verified by a third party of any kind, but yet they take them as true because they were right on so many different occasions. Absolutely. And everything, I think, is a factual psychic observation. So how do you sort all this out?
Well, truth be told, you have to operate that way. You have to operate with a level of trust, because when you open your mind for such perception, you can't be a critic. You can't self-judge. You have to open and trust and just communicate the information. So I'm wrong all the time. You can be wrong. Some of the best people are wrong.
Doesn't that make you lose your confidence?
You know what? I sometimes say to people, you're only as good as your last reading. So that keeps you on your toes, and it can erode your confidence to some degree. You're right, but it keeps you honest, because one of the things that I've noticed, and other colleagues that might have noticed as well with certain people who do this work, is there's a sense of omnipotence that can develop. And at the end of the day, being psychic is not what's most important in life. It's not why we're here. It's not the greater purpose of mankind. And so, by remaining humble, by remaining, sort of grounded, and accepting that, we can make mistakes, not, that we don't keep ourselves from spiritually evolving, but stepping backward just a second to kind of address your question more directly, there is a gray area, with information. Sometimes there's a lapse of time before something can be validated. Sometimes you won't get that validation because someone might not come back to you, take the time to communicate that to you. There's plenty of times where, a client will sit and say, oh, he's crazy or something like that. And then, I meet them 3 years later and they say, oh my God, a year after the reading, remember you said this? And I'll say, no. And they say, well, you told me this. And do you believe this and this and this came true? Why didn't you call me? I would have been nice to know, but I really don't care. But it illustrates the point that we don't always know. But you have to operate under the assumption that it's true. But I think that most importantly, requiring a certain level of validation is just a way to keep yourself honest and to know that what you're doing is legitimate.
Okay, but now you're the rational psychic, so I'm going to ask you kinds of questions that I might not just ask somebody who hasn't spent a couple decades, really, trying to understand psychic phenomenon. Most of the people I talk to, they just say, I see these things and I report on what I see and I don't really understand it, but it seems to help people.
Yeah.
But now you've gone on a quest to really understand what's going on with these things that I see. So just sticking for a moment with this question about what's happening when a psychic's wrong. Maybe a psychic has a 70% batting average, a 90%. I mean, do you have any idea of your own level of accuracy as a percentage?
I had someone, I'll avoid giving you a number because, that'll be a statistic out there that, I'll have to adhere to. But I had someone give me a very oppressive number once, that in his opinion, it was unsolicited, and I was flattered by it. But then, there's other people I've had another person say, you have this number, and really the number really doesn't matter, in my opinion. Really, at the end of the day...
It matters to me, I have to say, is, the person out here, it's one of the things I'm dying to find out, is the gosh darn number.
It's the quality of service is what's really important. And so there's an important thing to understand is that when a psychic works, every time a psychic goes into service, no matter who they are, I don't care if you're the most famous or the granny down the street who reads for her friends, it's an experiment. And there's a variety of conditions that can influence that experiment. Some of them we know what they are, some of them we don't. Some of the things we do know is the emotional connection, the disposition, the compatibility between the two people who are creating the experiment. So although, I am the seer, if there's something disagreeable between us, that can influence the reading. If you're reticent or fearful, not that you're interfering with my perception per se, but that reticence and that fear can pull me back into the here and now because of a concern for you or, a concern about being wrong or concern about taking care of you. These things all become distractions. There's also things that are called, sometimes they're called detractors or attractors. And I'll give you an example. Psychic ability, by and large, works primarily around something called need relevance. And that's just, do you need that information? Does it feel relevant so your mind's attracted to it? At the height of the Cold War, there was a psychic spy program here in the United States, one in the Soviet Union, one in Great Britain, one in China. The Soviets understood that one of the ways you could keep psychic spies from eavesdropping or remotely viewing, classified meetings was to put statues of, erotic statues or pornography around the meeting area because most of the readers were men and their consciousness would be attracted to the nude figures. And so that was one of the only things that they were.
If I'm ever going to have a secret meeting, it's going to be covered with
pornography.
Yeah, okay.
But because their mind was attracted to these images, or emotionally there was a compulsion to see what this was. And so because other than that, there's no real way to shield the activity of consciousness. There's stories about. I have a colleague who actually worked on one of these programs, and the NSA spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in looking for a mole after a remote viewer had almost verbatim read a classified document in a sealed safe. So it's pretty interesting. So when you're as a psychic, if you're working with a client, and let's say that you had a bad morning or a bad day, or there's something going on with you, that acts as an attractor. And can actually pull your focus and keep your focus away from, that reservoir of information that would normally be accessed in service of your client. So you have your emotional disposition, your mental clarity, any kind of environmental, distractions. There's just any number of things. And then there's how you interpret the information.
Yeah.
Your mind, few people understand because we use so many spiritual metaphors to explain psychic ability. But the reality is, whether you want to spiritually conceptualize it or not, before we get to that spiritual source, we're accessing that through our own subconscious. And so once you enter in and you go into that depth of your own mind, anything in there that is your own unhealed issue, or trauma, or things that you're secretly attracted to or desire, all those things can come to bear. They also can be projected outward, which also can be confusing, but that's kind of deals more with paranormal perception. But once you kind of access the subconscious, or arguably the super unconscious, where everything exists and as information, there's some part of your mind that has to grab a hold of, receive it, and then process it, and then communicate that to your conscious awareness, so then you can speak it to your client. So some people might, or arguably, they might conceptualize this as a spirit guide. This is what communicates to me. This is what protects me. This is the gatekeeper that guards my personalized, my individual consciousness from all that is. Yeah. And so when that information enters, your mind then quickly evaluates it and says, is this relevant to me or is it not? Now, the interesting thing about psychics, I think one of the things that makes us, predisposes us to be able to communicate information about other people, is that, there's either a conditioning or some deeply held concern or belief that what matters to you matters to me. And there's a whole conditioning process that goes into that. So that allows you to perceive information that's relevant to other people. However, because there's no context, that information will not make sense to me. And so my primary process won't always understand what that information is. And if it's too traumatic, based on what my history, my individuality, it could alter that information to make it more palatable. So when I either communicate that to you, it will come out as a symbol or something that's interpreted incorrectly, or it might not make it into my awareness at all because the mechanisms of my mind will hide it to protect me. Now, the interesting thing is when you're also maybe tapping in or telepathically connecting to information that is coming and going in your subconscious, conceivably, the same mechanism in me that distorts information to make it palatable or not to my mind is also operating in you. So sometimes, speculating, I could be creating a symbol from a symbol.
Yeah. And
the information could get lost, But when there's a clear channel, and there's a harmonious, compatible relationship, and all the stars are aligned, sometimes magical things can happen.
Yeah, listening to you talk about the complexity of the way the human processing system works, it seems miraculous that any psychic could be as accurate as some seem to be.
Well, the process is far more complex, I think, than people normally understand. And also, I think it's my way to, perhaps maybe I'm making it more complex than it need be. But I've always been that person. It didn't make sense to me when I was younger, when I was looking to explain my experiences and what I was going through. When I looked for answers, I was hearing paranormal metaphors to explain my paranormal questions, and to me, that didn't make sense. I wanted nuts and bolts.
Yeah, which brings us really to the core, I think, of the conversation I want to have with you, which is, how do you understand your psychic abilities? How do you understand what's going on rationally? From a perspective of neuroscience, from the perspective of extreme human capacities that are maybe outside of what we normally understand humans are capable of?
Well, the term rational is interesting because it lends itself to rationalizing or being, logical and grounded.
I meant the latter.
No, I know. I know, but it's interesting when I think about it, because there's an aspect of rational that actually distorts what we do. Meaning sometimes as a psychic, I'm sitting with you and I'm picking up information that seems strange to me. So I want to make it rational. I want to make it make sense. So I add information or twist it or turn it so it fits what I think is rational, but it is only irrational because I don't have the context. The appropriate context for that information is in your mind. So if I twist it and give it to you, then it becomes wrong. A quick example is I was mentioning earlier how once I was doing a reading for someone, and she was in her 50s, and I was seeing her as a little girl and her brother, and identifying his career and all these other things. I knew I was in the right place. And I saw her running and laughing, like squealing like only little girls can, like they were having a ball. And I saw her brother chasing her with a plastic alligator, and he's making it bite her hair. And when I communicated that to her, she started cackling. She was laughing so hard she was crying. And she said, "Oh, but that's wrong." And I went, "What?" And she said, No. It wasn't. It was a real alligator, And so I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. I was right, but I was wrong at the same time." And then I realized when I'm under stress, whether it's financial or emotional or what have you, I often dream of alligators and they'll eat me, or swimming in waters where there's dangerous alligators. And so my mind perceived the alligator and turns it into something that would be threatening to me. So I know I didn't answer your question, but it kind of backhandedly answers your other question too. But how we make things rational.
Well, how you understand at this point in your life your psychic abilities.
Yeah. I understand it as something. I make a point in the Rational Psychic to say that all human beings are extrasensory, but not all human beings are psychic. And I make the distinction. Oftentimes those terms are used interchangeably, and arguably they can be. But just to kind of differentiate, the way I understand a psychic ability in a rational way is to say that all of us have an aspect of our brain that scans the environment outside the bounds of linear time, and that's our amygdala. The amygdala, how it defines emotions, our emotional experiences emotionally, helps catalog our memory according to emotion.
This is a small part of the brain.
In the midbrain.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what it also does is when we were less primitive beings, it helped with our fight or flight response. It helped us sense and move. Ever try to grab a snake and it seems to turn and look at us before we can have a chance? Some aspect of it arguably knows there's a threat looming before it's even conscious, so it moves. We have that capability. Have you ever turned your head or blinked because something was about to hit your eye, even before you were conscious of something hitting your eye? That's an aspect of our lizard self, as it were, And so what I look at is that potentially as the human brain matured and we became thinking creatures rather than feeling and reacting creatures, we began to deny that feeling aspect of ourselves and rely on decision-making. But all the while, the perceptive capability of the less evolved mind, the brain, is still functioning. And what I suggest is that psychic ability is an adaptation of the fight or flight response, meaning we have this part of our brain that is always scanning for pain and pleasure outside the illusion of reality that is created by our brain. The brain orients our awareness in time and space, but yet this more primitive aspect of our brain it can step outside of that. And for a person who's maybe been conditioned to a certain way, they can perceive information that way, and also interpret it in a meaningful way. So I see that as a very rational kind of explanation for how it is we can possibly do what we do. Another thing I looked at is I talked about somatic responses in therapy, and I forget who maybe the originator of this idea was, but Freud became well known for, introducing this idea that he noticed, in therapeutic setting, that he would begin to feel in his own body the anxieties or the tensions or the wounds that his client was holding, and he would use these as tools to then address it in his client. And I think a proper psychic relationship with a client isn't dissimilar to a therapeutic relationship. There's an assumed level of expertise and a responsibility on behalf of the seer, and there's an emotional vulnerability and all these things. And so in that same situation, I thought, have I ever noticed, a somatic response in myself? And the argument is yes. Yes, I have. The difference is, I think, between someone like myself and maybe a trained clinician, is that, they're using that right away as a way of tuning into someone else to adjust their focus from a dialogue about some fight or a conflict to, I feel this tension, tell me about that. And in that there could have been, it's a stored memory, a visceral memory in the body, or it's just a clue there's anxiety or something. With a psychic, these somatic experiences actually can be interpreted literally, meaning not long ago I had a client on the East Coast of the United States, and she's working with me under a pseudonym. I didn't know her name. And, she was kind of headstrong. She had some bad experiences in the past with psychics. And she just wanted to know what was up. What was up with me? Like I had to prove myself before she was going to open up and ask me what her real questions were. So I scanned her and I started feeling, some pain in my lower back. And then that translated visually. I'm seeing that her blood was black and kind of cloudy. And obviously she doesn't have black blood, but I said, let me say this. And I described what I was seeing. I said, this tells me you're having issues with your kidneys. And she began to cry. And she said, yes, I had my kidney removed, had it replaced, and it's failing. Am I going to live? That was her question. And so these kinds of profound life or death questions come up. But more to your point is that, how we can rationally explain some of these experiences perhaps is that we're all human beings and we're all interconnected. It's just how is it that some of us have been conditioned to be able to have this level of sensitivity?
You're listening to Insights at the Edge, produced by Sounds True. Sounds True hosts an annual Wakeup Festival, a 5-day experience of transformation, held in August of each year in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. This is a gathering of spiritual teachers, artists, poets, and anyone interested in the many faces of awakening. For more information about the Wakeup Festival, please visit soundstrue.com/wakeup. And now back to Insights at the Edge. Yeah, so God, I have to be honest with you, Jack, I have so many questions right now, but I'm just going to keep going here. Yeah. You talked about remote viewing previously, the ability for somebody to see into a room hundreds, thousands of miles away. And so in a situation like that, are you saying that somebody whose amygdala is somehow finely tuned in this way, some capacity we all have, but some people have been trained to do it, it's the capacity that allows them to see what's happening in that room? I mean, how do you explain something like remote viewing?
Well, I don't know if I'm well versed enough to explain some of the techniques, how one is trained to be a remote viewer, because I think elements of that program are still classified. I know there are people that actually give workshops and train people, and there's specific...
I'm just using that as an example. I'm not particularly attached to remote viewing.
I don't know exactly how that would be relevant, because I don't know how they're trained. But I can say that I look at that function, that biological function, because it tells me that there is something physical that we can point to and measure that shows us that our bodies are more capable of more than what we normally accept as real, And there has been laboratory research done. For instance, there was I forget the university, but I'll give you an example of what kind of research has been done. You take an individual, you sit him in a chair, and they hook them up to a machine that measures their conductance, their skin conductance, and how much you sweat then affects how conductive it is, by the bioelectric conductance. And so that the sweat response is completely autonomic. You can't control it. You can't make yourself sweat. So by measuring that tells the researchers that there's no trick here. There's something going on. A response is triggered that the person can't control, right? So they put these people in chairs with a little monitor, and there's random images, and they're timed. And some of the images are benign, calm nature scenes, kittens licking themselves, trees. And then other images would be displayed that were, either pornographic or violent scenes of carnage or, ugly screaming faces and these things that would create an emotional response. And what they found was that that the sweat response, that the brain, the body reacts seconds before we even view this material. And so that made the researchers scratch their head. And this
I'm scratching my head.
Yeah, it's been replicated several times at different universities. And don't quote me, but the odds against chance are in the hundreds of thousands to one that this is real. But yet it is. And so what it shows is that there's an aspect of our mind that is aware of threatening things before it enters conscious awareness. And so I looked at that and I said, well, that's interesting. And then I began to compare some theories on how people are conditioned to be psychic. And, many people like to pretend that psychics have fallen out of the sky or slid down a rainbow and have come ordained by God to bless us all with all their wisdom. And the reality is that's not true. By and large, a lot of extrasensitive people have been raised in very stressful or traumatic environments. And that long-term neglect, abuse, stress can put the amygdala on red alert. And so they're hypersensitive. They're always scanning, looking, and in homes where children are raised, where perhaps they weren't allowed to blossom and individuate in a healthy way, and then maybe the parents' needs come first, or for whatever reason, children are taught that they need to pick up and defend for themselves because no one's there for them. They become acutely sensitive and really aware of anything going on around them. The emotional changes in their mother, in their father, in the relationships. And so if they're punished, say if there's conflict in the home, and the sensitive children oftentimes they become the sounding boards, or sometimes the whipping post, the black sheep of the family. They react. Their sensitivity, they're like the pressure relief valve in the home. They are reacting to this stress that no one else will speak about, and they get punished, or they're punished for things that are completely beyond their control. And this kind of conditioning, first, obviously, makes the child extra sensitive. Then they're taught that things that are none of their business are theirs to be concerned about, fix, or worry. So they're instilled with this sense that what is yours is relevant to me and relevant to my survival. So the combination of these two things, of course I'm oversimplifying, leads to a personality that is not only extra sensitive, but can perceive information. Sometimes, it leads to a person to identify as psychic, and then when they begin psychic training, they then begin to externalize their wounds, and they stop there, and they're satisfied that they're psychic because it justifies how they feel and the way they see the world. But what they're perceiving, feeling, and experiencing is just their own demons.
Explain what you mean by that, externalize their wounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
In your subconscious is all the things that, maybe you've forgotten, or things that were traumatic, that are buried within you, And when we begin psychic development, the first order of business is to go inside. Think of let's use this metaphor, the closet, the wardrobe from Chronicles of Narnia. You go inside, you open that wardrobe, and there's that dress that you haven't worn since you were 3. And there, hanging there, is a poster that depicts how your father came home drunk and frightened you. And there was the time, something else happened, and there's this memory and that thing, and all these things that we consciously don't recognize, but yet these things still have the ability to reach out and touch us through our feelings. But yet the rational mind, the logical mind, can't see what that is. So when these feelings arise, these experiences arise, coupled with sometimes environmental influences, people need a way to explain why it is they feel the way they do. And because these sensations are coming from a source that they can't readily identify, they lean toward, they fall onto a mystical metaphor. And then to give themselves a sense of control over their life when these things are arguably a little bit destabilizing, causing some uncertainty, we imagine that I perceive these things because I'm unique. There's something special about me. I assuage these feelings, and then I'm able to assume some kind of control, and then I gain some kind of prestige. And before you know it, I have this new persona that erupts, and it becomes like a Frankenstein. You can become trapped in it. But I think I kind of stepped away from your original question, but going into that wardrobe again, as you begin to deal with those things, those issues from your past, these things that don't have words or they don't have memories, they're just feelings, they can be projected outward, and like oftentimes you'll hear someone say, I don't like that person, their energy is like this. And maybe that person is disagreeable. But sometimes you dislike someone and you don't know why. And we'll say, it's got to be something about them. I've got to figure out what it is about them because I know. When the harder question is, maybe I dislike this person because they're triggering this memory deep inside me. I'm using them as a mirror. And that can be a tool, that relationship, that experience can be a tool or a means to heal something within ourselves. So one of the things that I'm looking at with the rational psychic is to kind of give people an idea that sometimes what they perceive, if it's not readily verifiable, that artifact could be used as a means to understand and know ourselves better. And then from that we can be better people.
Okay, now I want to travel back just a little bit here to what I think was a really important point you were making, which is that people who have psychic quote-unquote gifts, that in your observation, that many of those people had difficult childhoods. And it was because they were on some kind of hyper alert. Maybe it was a situation of sexual abuse or drunken parents or something like that. That's part of how this developed.
Certainly.
Was there something like that in your own background?
It's interesting you ask that, because how I first became aware, I call this conditioning theory. How I first became aware of this was I was working on a murder case, and this person the person who came to me said I was referred by this big name person. And I went, well, that's very flattering. I didn't know this person knew who I was, very famous person. And so I knew this other well-known person, and I noticed his email in a kind of a bulk email thing, and I said, oh, I'll just send him an email and say, thank you that was awfully kind of you, So this person engaged me, and he said, how the heck did you get my email? And he said, will you call me? So we had a conversation. He was a really friendly, great person, and one of the first things he asked me is, do you have an effed up childhood? I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I've noticed, and he shared that his father was an alcoholic, and he said, every psychic I know has this crazy childhood. And I said, oh, I hadn't really thought of that, and I certainly wasn't willing. I can be very guarded, and I absolutely have had my troubles in childhood. And so we had this interesting conversation. It was short-lived, and then I went back to what I was doing, and then I had mentioned it to a parapsychologist I did some work with. I was writing a study with, and he said he's actually was a department chair of psychology. And he said, oh, that's absolutely, I thought you knew that. And I said, well, I hadn't really considered it. And we had a dialogue about it real briefly. And then I began to do a little informal research, kind of checking in with my friends and colleagues. And I began to notice it more and more. And suddenly sort of the maladaptive behaviors I was seeing in certain people whose abilities I found suspect were beginning to make sense. And then I really did. I evaluated my own childhood and some of the issues that I experienced when I was young, and I thought 1 and 1 in this case really equals 2, and it really made sense to me. And so I think not to flatter myself, I can write rather eloquently, I think, on this, and I think I do a good job of it in the book. And I don't really use many of my personal experiences in the book, but I certainly own that I was able to write that because as, a black sheep child, or as whatever phrase you want to use, I was that child. So putting myself time traveling a little bit, I can comparing what I learned talking and working with other psychics, and also dialoguing with psychologists, trained clinicians. I was able to sort of process and really use my own experiences as a frame of reference to really own this and say, you know what, there's really something to this.
Okay, and then you said, we all have this capacity, but people who had effed up childhoods are more likely to have developed it.
Yeah.
But clearly there are plenty of people, just keep going with the effed up, who had effed up childhoods who didn't develop psychic abilities.
And there's people who are very talented who didn't have messed up childhoods. So there is arguably an unknown variable here. And I think that here's the thing. With people who had messed up childhoods, sometimes they're burdened with this overwhelming sense of self-concern. And I think that could be the ingredient. There's a woe is me. There's an aspect of wanting to control, which you'll see, fear of connecting, fear of intimacy, and those things don't lend themselves to psychic development. But see, with me, I was raised with two siblings who were in wheelchairs, so I was a caregiver when I was a child. And I was part of my effed up childhood, had nothing to do with them. It was extraneous. But at the same time, I was conditioned to be a caregiver. And I felt like I earned my place. I earned my place in my family. I wasn't loved. I didn't feel loved. But I felt like I earned it. I earned my right to have my own private, whatever, my keep, so as it were. And so I had that sense that I had to be acutely attuned, not only to be safe, but to keep safe by taking care of those in my family who couldn't readily take care of themselves. And so looking and talking with other people who were similar to me, also developed, a genuine psychic ability, I looked and I thought, what is it about them? What is it? And that's how I kind of came upon the idea of need relevance. I was first introduced to the concept of need relevance by someone who helped develop the early protocols for the remote viewing program that then went from UCLA to SRI. He introduced me to the concept of need relevance, and I thought, that's interesting.
That need relevance means that what the psychic perceives is what's necessary right for this moment to help the person.
Yeah.
To help
Meaning
the client.
What I'm capable of picking up on extrasensory-wise enters into my conscious awareness because there's a need relevance. There's an emotional need.
Is that me, the client's need?
That right away is my need. That's how I can access it. The trick as a psychic is entering into a state of compassion where your needs are vital to mine. That's how I can access information for you. That's barring we don't use any other kind of metaphors like spirit guides or, kind of connecting, just not talking about mediumship or any of these other things. This is just straight psychic, or, let's say this is just a way of accessing information. And so, for people who maybe, what I'm suggesting possibly, is that people who didn't perhaps develop psychic ability, their sense of safety has initiated or kept them so self-concerned and so fearful that the ingredient that they didn't get was the need to care for others.
I gotcha.
Like I have a colleague who terribly psychic, but she's like a loose cannon. She's so obtuse. She has no boundaries. She's not an individual in a very real sense. And it's very difficult to be around her because she's so invasive, but terribly talented. But she grew up completely enmeshed with her mother. From a time her mother was horribly disfigured in a fire, and left her unable to do certain things because her joints were fused. And so from a time she was single mom, so from the time she was old enough, she was helping her mom dress, doing her hair, makeup, all the way until the day she died. So this enmeshed relationship that, has created within her this constant need, constant awareness of other people's needs, on top of the stress and everything else. So that's where I'm going. I think that's the ingredient.
that in order to be a talented psychic, you have to have the ability to take the position of the other and really understand what their genuine needs are, that's one of the ingredients.
I think I'll detract the term talented from your, but just the ability to perceive verifiable information. I think that's a vital ingredient. Is being able to is that I think that's what I feel is important. I think that's what's missing from people who have just had damaged, or maybe damaged from, I don't like the word damage, but people who had difficult upbringings. I think that's the difference. Not to say they're not, they could be very empathetic, they could be kind people, but that ability to grab on hold of information, I think that's the missing ingredient.
Okay, now you mentioned a metaphor like spirit guides. Mm-hmm. So do you consider spirit guides to be real existing entities that we can tap into, or simply a metaphor for some other aspect of our capacity to access higher knowings?
It's an interesting question. I wrestle with this even still this all day. I notice with myself, obviously there is that mechanism of our mind, the primary process, where I think acts as a gatekeeper and interprets information for us. I feel like that could be a metaphor for a spirit guide. Now,
I'm not following you exactly there.
Okay. The primary process is that bit, that function of the mind that evaluates need relevance. If it is what think of it this way, it's like a valve. Information, if it's water, think of plumbing. Information as water or as energy flows through these pipes, meets primary process. Primary process says, "Oh, you feel relevant to me. You get to go to the conscious awareness." Then it says, "You're irrelevant. You go to the subconscious. You get buried. You don't get, So that gatekeeping mechanism and primary process also will sometimes distort information so it's palatable. Like with my alligator story, it makes it into a toy instead of something that would maybe scare me. So arguably, a spirit guide could be a metaphor for that function of the mind. It helps us. It guards that. It guards that doorway between our mind and everyone else's, between our subconscious and the superconscious, as it were. So that could be a metaphor, right? That's one way to look at it. Now, I've noticed, many people sort of, my spirit guide or my guide, it was a my spirit or spirit saying this, I've noticed personally, if I do have my own person, I don't talk about it very often.
You have a spirit guide. The rational psychic has a spirit guide.
That wasn't the purpose of this book.
Well, no, but I'm curious to know if that's the case.
Yes.
That is.
From time to time, there is an aspect that I engaged with, that I have a name for, that I feel like assists me.
Look, it's okay with me. I'm just trying to get get clear on it. So
yes.
When you say an aspect,
yes.
Is this an entity outside of Jack Rourke, or is this some further sensitivity that you're just naming whatever you name it because you want to have a conversation with yourself?
Exactly.
The latter.
No, all of what you said is true. Or not true. Here's the thing.
That's what I think.
Yeah. All of it's true or not true.
That's what I think.
Yeah. Here's the thing, is that when we create a spirit guide as an individual separate from us, what we're doing is we're sourcing information. We're creating a subject-object relationship with someone that mirrors conventional dialogue, which helps us process information. Because think how difficult it is to take in information that's part of us. There's always the observer and the observed. So it could be far more confusing to discern this information if we don't imagine that it's something separate from us first. Do you follow me?
Well, okay. The idea this could be that. It could be true. It could be not true. It could be both. I mean, what I hear you saying is that it's a convenient way for us as humans to process information, to name this function.
Right.
But how is it possible that this is actually an entity outside of ourselves?
I'll extrapolate. I'll speculate on that. But I want to say this first. Another reason that is helpful to either imagine or identify or arguably work with something that we perceive as something separate from us is it inhibits the inner skeptic. Meaning, if I just accept this information is coming from outside of me, I don't take ownership of it. I just say it to you. And that free flow is sometimes exactly what you need in order to get to what can be verified. So it kind of it inhibits that skeptical part of that left brain aspect of us. Now, arguably, if we want to pull focus out really wide, once our brain is the instrument that localizes our awareness, and the capacity to discern information requires us to shift our focus, to shift our awareness outside of that confines made by our brain. So outside that self-created illusion of individuality, there is no separateness. So even if there is an intelligence separate from us as we are individuals, ultimately, is it really separate from us at all? So by saying maybe it's just a part of your mind, that might sound cynical or rational, but maybe it only seems that way because our belief system, we want to grab onto something else.
Okay.
It gets a little hairy.
How do you work with your spirit guide? Since you confessed, I somehow pulled it out of you.
You pulled it out of me. The purpose of this book was to not to use any spiritual metaphors, so that people could.
I understand, but we're just having a conversation. So
they happen to be recorded.
But anyway, just so happens it's a conversation in front of others, but still.
It's interesting. I will do something like this. Before I begin, I'll center myself and I'll kind of still my mind and still myself. And it's a feeling based process. I can't describe what it is, but it's just a shift of awareness. And when that shift happens, I can feel it, and I know that I'm open for business. And right before that happens, I'll just say, hey, and I'll address this person by name, the person, and it's a name that I felt was given to me. And it's kind of an ironic one.
You can tell me if you want to.
No, I want to keep that private.
Okay, that's fine.
And I'll just say, please be present, and I ask you to, facilitate this communication between, my client and their loved ones and whomever and blah, 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 highest good, yada, yada. And then it's funny, when I work that way, my work generally is much flows better. It flows. It can be more precise. But then having said that, there's times without consciously engaging that mechanism or that individual, there's still some astonishing things that happen. But I find that I work harder when I don't engage that conceivably that individual. So maybe there is someone who we can't see that whispers in our ears from time to time. I don't know. That's something that can't be proven. But what I can say is, we often have experiences that can't be proven. The experience is real. What we feel is also often very real. And what I endeavored to do with the Rational Psychic was to communicate to people that, yes, our feelings are real, our experiences are real, but there are also ways that we can talk about these things, that we needn't be afraid, or we needn't feel embarrassed, or we needn't deny them. And we can by working with these things in a real rational, concrete way, we can learn to understand ourselves in a much more interesting way. Obviously, through the book, we understand a lot of different paranormal things that previously maybe folks won't have been able to explain or understand. But it really is about dealing with yourself. It's the instrument that that we're really getting at. How does it work, and why does it do what it does, and how can I let go of certain things and embrace other aspects of myself?
Okay, just a couple more questions, Jack. I know that the rational part of you loves when things are verified.
Yeah.
Third-party verification.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any ideas, dreams of how science could actually do a better job verifying psychic abilities? What kinds of tests or experiments you'd like to see?
Wow, that's really interesting. I believe that in the future, and I'm talking, probably 100, 200, maybe more years if we live that long, I feel like that there will be, I think as technology begins to mirror human biology more and more and more, and intelligence is transferred to machines, I think that we're going to come to understand the physical body as just an apparatus, because I feel like down the road we're going to be able to duplicate many of the things that we now think that we could never do. And not to sound blasphemous, but I think when we get to that point, more people are going to be willing to concede that there has to be more. There has to be more. And I don't know, like, per se, that we can create some machine that can measure ghosts, or that can interpret information like consciousness, or help, help us perceive information in the environment. I mean, conceivably, 100 years ago, if someone said there's things that exist in the infrared or the ultraviolet spectrum, you would say, no way, you're crazy. But now we know, and if we could see as a spider does, we would know that the world is far different than how we see it. You're probably aware of this, but spider silk, it refracts sunlight and it refracts ultraviolet light. And so when insects see, they see in the ultraviolet. So when they see that refracted light given off by a spider web, they believe that they're actually moving into an open space, because that's how they navigate. They navigate through shadows and light and dark and ultraviolet light, by monitoring the light. And so they see this bright spot, and they think they're going to fly into an open space, and that's how they get trapped. And the same way, insects and bees, because they can see in the ultraviolet, we might look at a flower and see that it only has 2 colors. They see 4. And it's beautiful because the way these colors are arranged, it actually directs them into the flower like a landing strip. So arguably, because of the limitation on our own senses, that there's far more going on. Maybe there are people standing right here that we can't see. And perhaps one day, just like how we've developed technologies that can see into the infrared or the ultraviolet, we'll have something developed that can see into a spectrum of light that we don't even know exists yet. Maybe that's possible, but we can only speculate.
Okay, and just one final question, Jack. You talked about how in your own emergence of psychic abilities that a difficult childhood was part of it. Mm-hmm. What would you recommend for somebody who so far hasn't had much access to psychic perception, but is interested in having that open in them? What would you recommend?
Wow. My first question would be why? What do you want to know?
I want more information so I have more power.
Yeah, that's
more capacities to accomplish stuff.
Yeah, that's the wrong answer.
I'm offering that because I presume that is probably the most likely response to that.
People think that it's going to offer them some kind of unique skill or ability.
And you get a leg up on the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that, with development comes responsibility, and there's a level of emotional distress that can come along with it, because as you begin to challenge what your brain creates for you as reality, you have to completely reevaluate everything you think you know, all your belief systems, all the certainties, and with that, our reality is created and partially created by how we define things emotionally. And as we change and as our perception changes, our feelings change. How we connect with things also is altered. And you can become really destabilized. And that's something that people don't talk about and don't understand. But in laboratories, in controlled settings where people are, instituting development, it's seen time and time again that people become unraveled. So it's a very precarious thing that people are asking for.
What is the right answer to the question then?
Service. Because when people always say, you have an amazing gift, you're so fortunate to have that gift, that always kind of rubs me the wrong way inside. And sometimes I'll smile and say thank you. But if I'm in some place where I feel comfortable kind of revealing more of myself, or, I'll say, it's really not a gift. It's only a gift when you give it away to someone else, and so service, the truth is that it takes a tremendous amount of compassion to be able to access that need relevance, for someone else. But compassion can be developed without being psychic. Sometimes that compassion leads to sort of a more empathetic or even extrasensory ability, but it doesn't make you a better person. It doesn't make you more powerful. It doesn't make you smarter. It doesn't make you sharper, funnier, wittier, and so, in Eastern traditions, where many of, we get our information about psychic ability and metaphysics, it was always advised to people on the path to enlightenment to ignore the paranormal voices, to ignore the visions and things, because these are things that are attracted to the ego. They're shiny objects that we want to grasp and hold on to. And then our point of focus becomes about, what can I do? Who am I? Look at this. Look what I can see. And we stop developing as human beings. So really, if someone who maybe didn't have this come naturally and they found their way to it, to develop it in order to better understand themselves or to serve others, there really isn't, it's not necessary.
Well, I love that idea that service is being able to be of benefit to others as a primary motivation of whatever one's next step is.
Sure.
It's beautiful. I've been talking with Jack Rourke. He's the author of a new book from Sounds True, The Rational Psychic, a skeptic's guide to extraordinary perception. Thank you. Thanks for bringing your heart and your rational mind and your huge openness and heart of service to what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
SoundsTrue.com. Many voices, one journey. Thanks for being with us.